I want to take a moment to talk about our sponsor, Alt21, the foreign exchange and hedging platform that saves you time and money on cross-border transactions. As a CEO, there are days when my calendar feels like a never-ending cascade of decisions, meetings, and problems to solve. Days when I can't remember if I've eaten lunch. The last thing I have time to think about is currency exposure. This is where Alt21 can help by taking the complexity out of foreign exchange. With their FX and hedging platform, you can lock in exchange rates and automate payments. And with their low fees, up to 90% less than competitors, you'll save money while freeing up your time for what really matters. If you want to stop juggling and start focusing on growing your business, head to alt21.com. That's alt21.com to find out more. Hello and welcome to Enter the Boardroom with Newroll, the podcast exploring what makes great boards and board members. I'm your host, Oliver Cummings, CEO of Newroll, the board search specialist and market leader, bringing science to the art of board hiring. Today's guest, Rita Clifton CBE, is Deputy Chair and Non-Executive Director at the John Lewis Partnership and also Chair at Simplyhealth. Previously, she's been a board member at Essential plc, ASOS plc, Nationwide Building Society, Dixon's Retail, Bupa, EMAP plc and Chair at Populous Group. Rita's non-profit board roles include Green Alliance, WWF, and Forum for the Future, where she is chair. A former CEO and chair of Interbrand, Rita is best-selling author of The Future of Brands, The Economist book, Brands and Branding, and most recently, Love Your Imposter, a book about modern business leadership. Rita, a huge welcome and thank you for being here.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm really interested to have this conversation. Big fan of Newroll, as you know.
Rita, I'd love to start with a discussion around why brand should matter to boards. And I'd invite you to reflect on your experiences and distilling them down to the essence to share with us what you know about the importance of brand in the boardroom that experienced executives who haven't got your experience typically don't know.
The first thing I'd say is that you always need to be in T-shape mode on any board. And I'm sure that listeners will know exactly what I mean by that, which is that you're bringing your deep expertise or specialism to bear on the hard downstroke of the T. But of course, you're always bringing your more general management experience and also your governance experience in the round to any board. So I think it's very important to say that when boards are thinking about having someone from a range of backgrounds, I think it's really important to go, actually, they know about that, but they are bringing more general business experience to bear. And I think I particularly say that because when people think about my executive experience, that was very much in brand strategy, brand consulting, market insight, research, culture, customer service, etc. That's true. But also I was running companies that were doing just that. That actually meant I had some quite heavy operational experience too, because when you're trying to run an organisation full of people with very strong ideas and occasionally quite stroppy attitudes towards those ideas, you have to really develop your management capability and also, frankly, your governance capability. And if you're owned by a publicly quoted company, or indeed actually you're on the board of one yourself in your executive backgrounds. So I say that's what you're always trying to bring, your T-shape. Now, when it comes to the hard downstroke of the T, clearly my background was in brand strategy. And I guess what that enables me to know and also to say is, however people express it, your brand is the most important and sustainable asset that you've got in the organisation. And if I hear it said once more, well, of course, brands are important, but our most important assets are our people. I'm sure you've heard that one too. And what I'll tend to say to that is, yeah, but organised to do what? Because if they're not trying to build a consistent idea together that they believe in and are committed to, they're just a group of people doing stuff versus another group of people doing stuff. And the other thing about people, of course, is they have a nasty habit of dying or leaving or taking their institutional memory, etc., with them. So what I'd say is that buildings fall down, products and services become obsolete, but the thing that lives on if you look after it is your brand. And then, of course, it's about what do we mean by brand? And there again, one can have a few misinterpretations. Sometimes people get over-obsessed with the visible bit of brands, the name and the logo and the packaging and indeed actually the advertising and communications, etc. But of course, brands really work when they help to organise the whole enterprise. They are a way of thinking about the whole enterprise that truly adds value across every single thing that the organisation does, inside and outside, that's liable to get more employee loyalty, but particularly more customer loyalty as well, and build those relationships that are the basis of creating long-term value. So I guess that's what I bring. That's my particular angle on helping oversee the creation of long-term value. The key to that, in my view, is how you build the brand in the round in its whole experience inside and outside.
When you first join a board, do you have a framework or a heuristic that you use to think about its brand that other board members listening might be able to use themselves?
Well, I think that there are three things. I mean, whenever I come onto a board, I treat each board almost as a mini consultancy project in the first instance. I like to throw myself into all of the past documentation, the business strategy, etc. Clearly a lot around customer and employee metrics, culture in the round. And also then try to interview as many key stakeholders as I can, other board members, the executive team, etc. I then like just to reflect on that and write down everything I feel at that time in terms of the priorities. And as far as the brand is concerned, my key questions are always, number one, how clear is this organisation about what its brand or its brands stand for? And can they express that in a really clear way? Because I tell you, when you go and talk to people individually about, can you tell me what this brand stands for or what the purpose of the organisation is? By the way, I don't much care what vocabulary people use. Sometimes they talk about purpose, providing it's distinctive, I don't mind. You know, the brand thing, positioning. I mean, you can use a lot of different words because just occasionally, as I've said, people can misinterpret. The thinking is absolutely the same. How do you run your distinctiveness through everything that you do? And do you own that distinctiveness? And that's why I'd say I never use the word reputation as a substitute for brand, because reputation is the thing that happens as an outcome in people's minds and in their hearts and what they're prepared to say, whereas the brand or the purpose is that's how you organise what you do. And you don't own your reputation, but you do own your brand. So if you want a better reputation, you need to organise around your brand to get yourself in a better position. So that's organising the reality. That's the brand. It's the whole enterprise and everything it does. And reputation is the outcome.
One of the things I find difficult to get my head around on brand as a CEO is working out how to justify investment in it. It's clearly something worth having. In episode 53, Hamilton Helmer talked about the example of Coca-Cola and the brand moat that it has, where it can charge a huge premium for sugar and water thanks to its brand. But when you're building a brand, as we are at URoll in service of our vision for building better boards, it's so hard to know where and how much to invest when it's intangible, and the lead time on return on investment is so long. Really interested to hear, how would you, if you were sitting on the URoll board, counsel me as a CEO to think about investing in the brand?
I think just firstly, a couple of misconceptions, which is that when you're talking about brand investment, sometimes people use that as a proxy for marketing investment. But of course, when we talk about marketing investment, what most organisations are really talking about is marketing expenses. And that tends to go year to year. Whereas, of course, brands, if you're going to try and build them long term, you are maintaining or building an asset. You're not just trading off that asset. There's a real difference between looking at the brand as an asset and versus the brand being a revenue generating machine. And that is the reality. So brand is, as I say, the distinctive asset. That is the enterprise, the distinctive enterprise that you are building that creates long-term value. And marketing is the engine, the discipline that makes the very most of that asset to your customers and to your audience. Now, these are quite important distinctions in my view. And the reason I say that is because clearly when you're talking about marketing investment, it very much depends on the life stage of the organisation, how ambitious you are to grow, what category you're in, etc. But, just maintenance level, you're looking at a rule of thumb of around 5%, say 5 to 10%, depending on the category of total revenue to be invested in marketing. If you're in a growth stage, it can be 10 to 15%. And actually, if you're in a highly competitive sector, technology, etc., you may well be looking at more than that. So that's in terms of marketing investment. But the thing that people often don't think about is in terms of brand investment, it's very often to do with time and also to do with expert input. And that just means that, your training programs, your recruitment, your training programs, you just need to think about how they are going to be reflecting your brand. How do you do them? How do you have a list of criteria, by which you're trying to find the right employees that actually work to build your brand, as opposed to just by generic skills. So that's a really important element. And that's not about spending lots of money. That's about mind space and mindset and just adjusting your behaviour. And equally, when you're putting IT systems in, making sure the use of AI, you need to make sure that you're doing that in a way that's distinctive and liable to build your brand. And in terms of customer service training, how you're answering the phones or how you're replying online, etc. What about in branches if you've got stores, etc.? So that's really about how you're spending the time and the money that you're already committed to spend, as opposed to spending an awful lot more. So I look at that absolutely in the round as opposed to marketing investments. Let's be really clear about that and how is that different and distinctive versus our competitors. And now the second characteristic of great brands, apart, next to clarity, is coherence. How do I make that show up through everything I do? All of my contacts with my customers and indeed the sort of people that we're recruiting. And one of the reasons for saying that is because if I had a penny or a euro or a dollar for every time someone swears to me that great customer service, obsessive customer service was a really important attribute of that organisation, and you try and get hold of them either on the phone or otherwise, you try and search for any kind of contact details on the website or the chatbot isn't working. You just go, that is how not to build a brand. You can spend as much money on you as you like on the outside, have a great PR, set up, etc. But actually, if you're not doing what you say you're going to do, you might as well just save your money. So I know a lot of startups who have stitched the brand in from outset, clarity about what the brand stands for. Just have a look at an organisation like Xero when they started, and that's an accounting software business that I was a huge admirer of. And they stitched beautiful accounting software, slightly unpromising category, doesn't it, to begin with? But the experience, the user experience and the distinctiveness of the going, actually, this could be a really good experience. That's a really radical idea. And they made it show up not only through their products and services, but how that showed up, the kind of ease of use, and also how they did marketing, how they did events. There were spectacularly good events that they were using to build the brand. They weren't spending at that time in the early days lots of money on advertising. So every brain cell and focus counts, not just the money.
Your Xero example really resonates. They really have made accounting beautiful. I'm thinking about how that sort of tangibly applies in our example. We have this vision for building better boards that underpins everything we do. The things that I would think of as our distinctiveness, but I'd love to get your thoughts on whether this really meets your criteria for distinctiveness, and if not, how we might refine that. But we use technology in a way that others don't. We have a scale because of the focus on non-executives only that others don't. Is that the sort of distinctiveness that you're talking about, or is it something more than that?
Yes, it is. I mean, look, you do need to start off with a distinctive point of view. I mean, why did you start the business? What problem were you trying to solve, or what opportunity were you trying to solve? I think one of the challenges when you're entering a marketplace, and particularly with a very different offer, is that you really got to be very clear about what that distinctiveness is and glue that in to your brand assets, if I can put it that way. And, I think it's very important to do that because when you're talking about a descriptor, so if you have a look, for example, at Business Growth Fund or BGF, which I'm also a great admirer of, it wasn't completely obvious to some of the potential investees or growth stage companies exactly what BGF did that was very different. And of course, they're patient investors. They are committed patient investors for growth stage businesses. And it was very important to make sure that it was clear that people knew what they were about and how they were different from others. So making sure you glue that into your brand identity. And so when I say a descriptor, I mean, whether it's investors in business or long-term investors in business or investing, whatever the descriptor it's going to be, it's not the same as a slogan. And these things are often, it's not the same as saying into the future together, which, insert any bland phrase or slogan that you can. This is about establishing what you do and who you are. And that is a very important first step for any brand that is genuinely bringing something new. Now, once you've established yourself, you can then actually make sure that you are creating a distinctive position within a category, and you might not need to spell out exactly what you do anymore. There are many businesses that started off doing one thing and then they end up developing themselves into something slightly different. If they don't change the product in a way that the brand allows them to do, you end up in a Nokia situation or a BlackBerry situation. Nokia thought they were a handset company, and the way they were organised was in a bit of a silo. They had a great brand communication idea that was about connecting people, but they didn't manage to connect that with the kind of product innovation that they were doing, because, of course, in product innovation, you're going to connect people. That gives you lots of things to do in terms of both hard product and also softer service. And indeed, we're talking about Xero, and they've moved from beautiful accounting software to beautiful business. Don't know where they might go next. But you do need to make sure your brand will be, stretchable and versatile enough to go forward in the future. So be very careful. You start off with a product and you need to make sure you are establishing yourself on that, just like Apple did, Amazing Apple, that is the most overused case study in the universe, but that was because they did exactly what I've been describing, clear about what they stood for, coherent about how they make that difference show up, the humanizing technology and technology that looks like it's made for human beings, coherent about how they made that show up for everything they did, products and services, the way that they trained people, their stores that didn't look like stores, that looked like more concierge type experiences. Yes, of course, in marketing, communication, but they did all of those things to make the whole brand valuable. And they've been able to take that trust and that, easy to understand human approach to technology, to take it into health and fitness, services, all the things that we know about Apple. So you can take it anywhere, providing you get it right in the first place.
One of my experiences as a CEO is that the market perception is usually a couple of years behind the reality of what you're doing. Is that normal in your experience, or is that a sign of a marketing or brand issue that needs addressing?
So it very much depends on how quickly you're able to get your message out. I mean, when you're talking about a name change, for example, when you think about Arthur Andersen and Accenture, I mean, they had to make that transition really quickly. And so they invested a huge amount of money in telling people that was the change that they were making. And so therefore, actually, over a 2-year period, they really did manage to get that change across and create a real critical mass of people, the right audiences who understood what they were doing. What I would say is that, the reputation thing, reputation is reality with a lag effect back to that point, which is you've got to be building something that is truly distinctive, that customers love, that your people love. And that's where you've got something that you can really build on and that you can use marketing and amplification to make the very most of. So if you need to do it in a hurry, that means that often you've got to spend a lot of money because you've got to get awareness and you've got to get it quickly. So if you do have to get a name change, I mean, when Elon Musk changed Twitter to X, even though people are still saying X, formerly known as Twitter, and some people are still talking about tweeting as opposed to Xing and everything else. But it sort of helps when you are the richest man in the world, and also you've got all these mega millions of followers because you're telling them in real time that you're making the change, and you didn't have to spend a lot of money on that because actually, now you could argue that that he didn't actually make much of a different message about why he was doing what he was doing and what difference that would make. But as it happened, people saw the change in real time and then they decided whether they liked it or they didn't like it. But, didn't need to spend a lot of money on advertising because the product and the service and the coverage was the advertising, and Elon Musk was the advertising vehicle. He doesn't have any problem in getting awareness, let's put it that way.
What are the situations you faced as a board member where your brand experience has helped you unlock or maximize an opportunity?
I joined the board of Nationwide because I really believed in the potential of the difference of Nationwide. And I could see that I could contribute something. I mean, why do we join boards? Why do we do what we do? You feel as though you'd like to make a difference. And I could see that there was a real difference to be made. And I much admired who they were fundamentally and felt that I could help. I wasn't trained in financial services at that time, but obviously I had quite a lot of knowledge of culture, customer service, brand, marketing distinctiveness, etc. And so therefore I felt I could really make a difference. What I felt with Nationwide is that they weren't making enough of their unique model and unique status as a building society, one of the very few surviving building societies. And the fact that they didn't have external shareholders. The banks, financial services organisations were the unpopular people in the class after the financial crisis and the greed and risk that was attached to that. So Nationwide had a really distinctive part of its proposition, which was not owned by shareholders, owned by its members. And actually the whole provenance of Nationwide was about enabling groups of people to do together what they couldn't do alone, creating pools of money that enabled people to buy their own home that was a collective pool. So I think that there was real potential in that. And I guess that what you do in those situations, you can mentor and coach the chief marketing officer or indeed the chief strategy person who's looking after the brand and the product innovation, culture, etc. So you can mentor those people. Otherwise, if the organisation is going to recruit someone who's a specialist, make sure that you are part of that recruiting process. You're usually asked to because you know what you're talking about. So you bring someone in or you recommend someone or as a part of the interview process, you make sure that you are recognising who can do the job that you know needs to happen. And the other thing is you can introduce consultants or experts into the organisation, bring people together. I think that's your role. Your role is not to step over the line and get your hands on. You can influence, you can ask questions, all of those things. But I think one of the key things you can do is ensure that you're helping the CEO find the right person to do the job that needs to be done. Make sure that you are mentoring and supporting that person and introducing the right levels of expertise to enable them to be the most influential that they can.
If you've ever wondered how to better articulate the value you bring to boards, you're not alone. With New Role Plus, you get expert, personalised support. Someone working with you to sharpen your board value proposition, stay current on fast-moving topics like AI, and open doors to more ambitious, higher-profile roles. Head to plus.newrole.com to find out more. One of the things that I've done as a CEO and the past experimented with is having an operating manual or an instruction manual for using me. And so I've written down various things about how I work to help people get up to speed quickly so that when I first start working with them, I can just give that to them and then they can sort of ask questions. I guess you could do something like that as a non-exec, but it sounds like you'd go down more of a discussion route when you're first doing the onboarding. Is that the moment that you do it?
I wouldn't say I've got any fixed moment of doing it, and I might well sort of say it in different ways over time so that you're creating the right expectation, that you're not going in there to sort out the marketing department. That's not your role. It's to ask the right questions and to make sure you're making the right connections for people, getting the right advice. Saying, I think this person would really help, because you know that they'd say the sort of things that you would say if you were there in your executive capacity. So I think that you just, drop it into the conversation. That's how you work. I wouldn't say, I'm sitting around the table, hello, I'm Rita Clifton and, I'm a blah, blah, blah. I wouldn't sort of stand up and do that as my calling card. I would always explain that, if people said, what do you think about this? What do you think about this campaign? I'll say, well, here is my here's my objective view on this. I think it's got these positives. I think there were certain things that you could look at. If you want me to have a session offside with the CMO, I'm happy to do that. So I just think often talking about things is the best thing to do, as opposed to there being lots of hidden agendas and things of that kind. I'm a big believer in creating that, forgive me, but I think it's really important, psychological safety on any board, in any management team, etc., that you're able to say things openly, not just because you want things to be better. And then, of course, it's about saying things in the right way, which is why, obviously, some people who are brilliant executives might not be so great in the non-executive space. And then that can really demoralise and strip power and confidence from the executive team. And that's not a great place to be either.
I'm so pleased to hear you are an advocate of psychological safety. In episode 100, we had Amy Edmondson, who is the originator of that concept, talking about that in the boardroom, which was brilliant.
Well, and I think just on that, by the way, I really hate it when the executive team feels that, joining a board meeting is akin to root canal treatment, and they dread it and everyone sort of sits around the table. I mean, clearly people need to do their preparation well for board meetings. But I think it needs to feel very much, at the end of the day, these are senior executives. And, I think that the board needs to be respectful of that, not to make people feel scared, because people clam up and they don't tell you as much when they're scared because they feel so defensive. So I'm sure that's what your previous interviewee was talking about too.
Yeah, it reminds me of Dom Joseph in episode 74, whose advice to investor directors was drop no bombs. So we've now got to add to that no root canal treatment from Rita.
Yes, no root canal treatment. But actually, I'm just on the drop no bombs. I mean, I know one of the questions I think you were going to come to later, and I might just answer it now, is one of my biggest mistakes that even now I reflect on is where I had a problem with a recommendation that the CEO was bringing to the board, and I didn't raise it in advance of the board. And so therefore what I said in the board meeting, even though I believed it to be true, it's not good practice, in my view, to spring things on, particularly when they're quite important and could be quite public decisions that they might have told their team that they were going to raise at the board. So, you've got to make sure that you respect people's point of view, their relationship with others, and make sure that you are giving people plenty of notice if you are going to be saying something, and be open about the fact that, maybe, look, so-and-so and I, we don't happen to agree on this. We do need to come, obviously, to a collective point of view, but we have got slightly different, perspectives on this. Let's talk about it. And then, of course, it's the skill of a chair to bring different points of view together and find the common path through. So making sure, as I say, no bombs in the boardroom. If it's going to be a big bomb, you've got to make sure that people know it's coming and that they know why it's coming. Be prepared for it.
No bombs, no root canals. You joined ASOS's board in 2014. Witness rapid growth as well as some turbulent times. And in 2019, ASOS issued profit warnings and its share price plummeted. What do you find are the main board challenges in a situation like this? And how did you feel your particular experience helped?
Well, I think on this one, look, I'm happy to say, when I was talking about joining the ASOS board in 2014, and by the way, when I came off the board 6 years later, the company was about 4 times bigger than it was when I joined. So we're talking about some pretty seismic growth. I remember being approached about it, thinking this is a really interesting company at a really interesting stage, and particularly at the stage it was going through, which was going from a sort of owner-CEO, high growth, very entrepreneurial business, actually into a more mature, publicly quoted organisation, and it had to do that transition without losing its vim and its distinctiveness, its quirkiness, and I guess just its metabolism. I mean, it was really important to keep up that sense of ownership and entrepreneurial spirit, whilst at the same time recognising that when you're a publicly quoted company, there are certain things you've got to get right. There are certain systems and processes, etc. So I was really interested on the board. I was really interested in the brand. I had teenage daughters at that time as well. So obviously they were very keen. So I joined the board, and then literally a month later, there was a profit warning. There were all sorts of reasons for that, but there was a profit warning. And then 2 or 3 months later, there was a warehouse fire. And I was thinking, this is quite eventful in the first few months. I think that in any crisis, what you know from your own experience, and also I worked in the brand world, etc., I know that most strong brands can come back from crises if they do the right thing. I mean, if you just think about Toyota, if you think about Coca-Cola, if you think about Apple, if you think about Cadbury's, I mean, all of these organisations that managed to get through crises, and this wasn't a crisis. It was, it was some unfortunate events, but not a crisis. So what you've got to recognise is you've got to look after the brand. You've got to make sure you communicate with your customers. You've got to make sure you carry on doing all the things that people love about you. And when I talk about responding to crises, I usually do the 3 things. Number 1 is you've got to own the problem. You've got to take responsibility for whatever's happened. Number 2, you've got to go way beyond what you think is minimally necessary to sort it. It's a bit like the old Tylenol example. You get the products off the shelves, even though it's a contained incident, you get the products off the shelves, or you get the water off the shelves, or you get the packs of meat off you've got to go way beyond what you think you're going to be. And you've got to put the right extra levels of safety and extra levels of risk management in place to make sure it doesn't happen again. And then the third thing is you've got to communicate. And that means to your customers, to your employees, yes, the media, if that's relevant to you, but you've got to respond in the right way.
John Lewis and Waitrose are among the UK's most trusted brands, and you became deputy chair of the John Lewis Partnership in 2021, just after its first ever annual loss and the cancellation of its staff bonus. I think the partnership had been exploring some bold changes, store closures, diversifying into services, even considering external investors for the first time. And that last point sparked public debate, with Mary Portas infamously accusing John Lewis of losing its soul. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on how does a board best deal with a situation where the world are so interested in a business and all the scrutiny and unhelpful commentary that can bring.
Well, I mean, one of the wonderful things and the privileges of serving on the John Lewis Partnership Board is just how much these brands are, play their role in people's lives, and how much affection that there is for these brands, and also how much trust. So that obviously brings a huge amount of responsibility. But of course, it also means that, the media, general public, people are really interested in what's happening. And of course, John Lewis Partnership is a unique organisation, unique governance, unique provenance. And obviously as an organisation, particularly over COVID, I mean, the retail sector, I don't need to tell you just how much the retail sector was affected. I mean, just dramatically affected by the wave after wave of pressures and needs, having to close stores, open stores, keep on getting, food out to customers in the grocery sector, and, all the investment you had to put in place to protect partners and to protect customers during COVID. I mean, it was a very challenging period of time, because obviously you're having to do things that are very upsetting, whether that means closing stores or making people redundant, particularly partners who are co-owners of the partnership. I mean, it is an organisation that's run on democratic principles. There's a partnership council, one of the key governing authorities at the John Lewis Partnership. And it's an extraordinary thing that partners are able to bring whatever questions and challenges that they feel is appropriate to the chairman and also the leadership team, etc. So it's an extraordinary organisation, and it generates extraordinary interest. Now, the downside there is that everything tends to be amplified. And the chairman of John Lewis Partnership, everyone was very interested in the leadership of the John Lewis Partnership because Dame Sharon White, who's an extraordinary person and executive, but obviously she was quite different in that role versus the partnership had before, the experience of someone running the partnership had before. And that also attracted a lot of attention and publicity too. And so, therefore, you put all that together in those difficult circumstances, and you just have to be philosophical about the fact that people, they wanted to know. I mean, there was a point where, and again, this is in the public domain, Sky News and various media channels were outside of the Partnership Council meetings trying to get partners who were involved to speak about what had happened. I mean, it was things that were happening that were not to do with looking after customers and looking after, partners and, our supplier relationships and all the things that really do make the partnership special and work. So dealing with that sort of publicity, again, it's just something that you have to do. And all you can do is to keep on reiterating the truth and the facts and, getting people to understand just how challenging the external factors on the world of retail have been. So I guess that's also quite a long way of saying that, because of all that scrutiny and because of the over-enthusiastic coverage sometimes of, things that happen within a partnership, it's best not to believe everything that you read in every publication because, that thing about, lies will out while the truth gets its pants on. I can't quite remember what it is, and I know people weren't deliberately lying for the most part about the situation, but nevertheless there are a lot of exaggerations. I mean, there was never any question about the John Lewis partnership not having the ownership structure as in being co-owned by partners as it is. There was never any of that discussion. And so it's interesting that there was a comment that was misinterpreted and then of course amplified, which then if you're not careful you have to keep on correcting over time. And also you've got to recognise that some commentators are making their comments for their own purposes as well as because they genuinely want to help the business. I mean, people make contentious comments or they speak their mind. I'm sure it's genuinely meant. But obviously they're doing it for their own reasons as well as, of course, for reasons for the business. So you just have to recognise and be realistic about some of those things. I mean, the great thing is a lot of people really want the partnership to succeed, and that is fantastic and it's a real privilege. And you obviously do feel the responsibility to make sure that happens. And what you can do about that is to make sure you're doing the right thing day in, day out, that you're supporting the team to do that. And also you're making sure that, the partnership and what it stands for and the partners involved are supported in every way they can be.
Are there times where you've seen boards and individual board members go wrong on their thinking on brand in situations like that?
I mean, one that actually I still feel quite intensely now, and this is a long time after, and I wasn't actually even on the board of this organisation, but it was a board and senior management decision. And this also relates to external and media pressure, and why I say that you've really got to take a deep breath and try not to get too consumed by short-term pressures and the pressures to just get out there and say something and do short-term responses, because that feels, I mean, that's a little bit like what unfortunately politicians do. They're so busy in sort of crisis communication mode and they're always coming up with things to say. They don't necessarily have a strategic view or a long-term view. Certainly not one that they seem able to share very often that will rally people around to their cause. But actually, I still reflect even today on British Airways, and I'm very aware how long it was ago now, but you may or may not remember when British Airways changed their brand identity to have tail fins on the back of the planes that reflected all the different nations of the world that actually British Airways flew to. So actually you had red, white and blue on the front, and it actually said British Airways. I mean, there was a clue in the name, British Airways. And then at the back of the plane, again, it was representing all the very rich and interesting cultures and places around the world that British Airways flew to. And in many ways, it symbolised Britain's soft power on a world stage, and also the uniqueness of British Airways and how many locations and how many different types of people British Airways hosted on its planes going all around the world. And it was a great story, Britain on a world stage and connecting all these cultures. When it was launched, there was immediate misinterpretation of this, and I won't repeat some of the things that the more reactionary elements of the media said about it, but it was bordering on racism, some of the letters really that you saw at that time. And it didn't help that Margaret Thatcher at the time, when she was being taken around the exhibition, she put her handkerchief over the tail fin because she didn't approve. Now, of course, the media and politicians went into overdrive, which of course caused the board and the senior management to go into overdrive. Oh my goodness, what are we going to do? And I remember sitting in lots of focus groups because I happened to arrive in the organisation that had developed it some time before, and I found myself having to think about what to advise British Airways to do. And I sat in a lot of focus groups, and one quote really stood in my mind, which is someone who was actually a Daily Telegraph reader, they happened to be. And they said, I know that we don't like it, but I think if they just stuck with it, we'd all get used to it. And I think absolutely out of the mouths, that was the reality. I think long term, that would actually have been a great platform for British Airways in its brand identity and what it stood for, etc. But instead, it made people think, actually, they're going to change their mind. If I pressure enough, if I cause enough fuss, they're going to change their mind. I don't think it was right to do that. The evidence didn't say it was right to do that, but short-term opinion did hold on to a long-term strategic view.
Time has flown, which means it's time for the lightning round, where I say a short question and ask you for a quick response if you're ready.
I'll try to do that.
Best book every board member should read and why?
Oh, very difficult one. Lots of books. Obviously, one of my books, I've got to say that, haven't I? But otherwise, Built to Last. It's a great book and lots of wisdom that is timeless. So I think that's what I would do.
Boardroom behaviour that irritates you most?
Oh, grandstanding and tiny details that could probably be discussed outside of the room. So it's the top and bottom, the topping and bottoming. That's not to say you shouldn't notice details. It's really critical that you do. But when you feel as though there's a point being made as opposed to generally trying to move things forward.
Favourite quote?
Oh, God, I've got lots of favourite quotes. I think, as far as my brand hat is concerned, I think I'd say Howard Schultz, who, as we know, was the sort of erstwhile CEO of Starbucks, who said, I don't run a business, I run a brand, because he knew it was all the same thing. So I think that's, it's not different. Brand is business, great business, long-term business is brand. So I like that quote a lot.
Most significant professional insight?
Do what you're great at. It's a really bloody obvious thing. Do what you're great at, particularly when you're building your career. When you're building the stroke of the T, you can then develop the top bit, but be really good at something. And then you can spread your experience across the top.
Worst professional advice you've ever received?
It's really important to kick ass. I hate that kind of philosophy. You want to make things happen, but, chewing concrete blocks for breakfast and kicking ass or making gestures for the sake of it, I think is counterproductive.
What have you changed your mind on about boards over time?
Boards can and should be human places. And people don't always think that about boards. I think it's really important to bring your humanity into the boardroom as well as your professional experience. So I don't know whether that's changed my mind, but certainly it's something that I have wanted to see and have tried to bring in to the boardroom. And of course, I've learned lots about governance. I didn't realise how much governance there was attached to boards until I became a non-executive director. And it's crucially important.
How are you better today as a board member than when you started?
I've done more. I've seen many situations. I mean, it was great being a consultant because you work with so many different businesses and every possible issue. But obviously, being on a board, seeing the cycle of board coming round, etc., I just think I know more and I've seen more and I can help more.
And finally, 3 things our listeners should take away from this episode if they take nothing else.
Number 1, I talk about brand, 3 things for brand. I talk about clarity, coherence and leadership. And I think I'd apply that here as well, which is clarity. You've got to be clear about as much as you possibly can what the organisation stands for. Make sure people are clear about that, what your role, your distinctive role is, and also how the organisation and you are going to be different and bring something distinctive. The second thing is coherence. So how do you make sure an organisation organises for how it intends to be different? How do you make everything show up in a way that is coherent to the clarity that you're seeking? And that goes from boardroom behaviour all the way through the organisation and making sure you're coherent in what you're setting out to do, the dashboard that's going to measure your progress to that and also how you're going to measure people by it. It's really important that you as a board member recognise and hold people to account for that and everything else. And leadership is the third characteristic, which is it's really important who runs the organisation, how they symbolise all the best values of that organisation. It's very important that the board behaves in a way that reflects what the organisation's about and those values and symbolises the behaviours that you're seeking to see in the rest of the organisation. And of course, part of leadership is about being restless, about setting the agenda, about being innovative. And you've got to make sure that you are bringing that kind of energy and drive and questioning to the process.
Rita, no bombs, no root canals. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom and experience.
It's a pleasure. I enjoyed talking to you. Thanks very much.
If you're ready to sharpen your board proposition and open up access to more aspirational roles with expert guidance alongside you, Mural Plus can help. As an Enter the Boardroom listener, you get 10% off. Head to plus.neural.com and use code ENTER at checkout.